And yes, exactly like you said, as a chef, you're in the middle of a lot of things. You're on axis, kind of, where you're the connection with the sourcing, the producing of the food, and where you
Hmm.
source your ingredients, and then obviously the customers, or at least the people that will be eating it. So it's kind of like the end of that full cycle. You're in the middle,
Hmm.
so you're also the person who will dictate a little bit what relationship people will have with food, at least with fine dining and cooking.
Hmm.
And that is a very important job. You are in the middle of everything, and I'm sure you have a lot of things to say about that, and that's why I'm glad we're talking to you today. As you may know, the research that we've been doing that we're addressing right now, it really concerns the way that we construct our environment, and namely with agriculture, the way we produce our food, and how that translates into our knowledge of food, our relationship, and our conception of food. So you're in the middle of all of that. With the idea that, like, looking at public health and all the health issues that we have these days, and then looking at the environmental issues that we're dealing with, a lot of these things actually interconnect when we're looking at agriculture, the way that we grow food, the way that we feed ourselves, all of this is related. And the research is kind of exposing how if we were focusing on going back, because we used to do that for the longest time, going back to a more sustainable way of growing our own food and therefore feeding ourselves, we would not only gain healthier food habits and better health, but also solve de facto, almost indirectly, a lot of environmental issues that we're seeing, or at least help reduce the negative impact that we're seeing these days. So before we dive into the more tricky things like that, first and foremost, you're a teacher, so I kind of want to ask you, you're touching on that a little bit. What is the priority for you as a chef and as a teacher when you're telling and talking with your students how to construct a dish, how to create a meal?
So yeah, so when we talk about you hit the nail on the head when you talk about being that pivotal person, as a chef, you basically can control what enters your kitchen. So as far as buying stuff and dictating how the recipe is going to be presented. So in our classes, we actually we are able to integrate local products, and we buy from local purveyors. Those products, so we can start exposing our students to these products. So it's so like right on the ground level. Okay, we're doing it. We're walking the walk here. So and as far as talking about the how we're talking about agribusiness. How the way farming is. It's highly centralized. We have these huge farms that produce, the very high yield, and it's not just, and it's like a monoculture. Like if you're going to go, they grow acres and acres of corn or whatever it is, and unfortunately, we're learning about the impact of it. I mean, the environmental impact. I mean, in the short term, it solves a lot of problems when you farm like that because you streamline a lot of the labor because you don't need, you have this machinery that does a lot of the stuff. As far as rotating crops, and you know what I mean, as far as also like being very centralized, is like, for example, when you go to California, that's where a lot of, I don't know the percent, I don't have the numbers, but the majority of what we see in restaurants and the grocery stores, the produce is grown in California. It's very in the Central Valley, and what they're doing is they're taking advantage of that particular it's basically, it has a lot of sun. It's very, very arid. You know what I mean? And it has the right soil conditions. So, and of course, there's issues with they take the water. I mean, there's aqueducts and they, you know,
Soy, soy and beans and wheat come primarily from Southern California, and
um,
even though it's good, like fast yield area for that, these plants are also naturally very water thirsty. So when you
yeah.
think about growing monoculture, that will deplete the soil very quickly because
Hmm.
there's no cycling in an area that has little water naturally, and but putting a plant that needs a lot of water, it's not sustainable in itself. It wouldn't grow there, not at this level, not with this type of heat.
Absolutely. And they've actually seen it like this, you actually see the ground, like they
Yeah,
depleted the
for first.
groundwater, it start to sink. And now with, with global warming, that model is, now it's starting to, it's really showing that it doesn't make a lot of sense, to farm like that, or we can't just solely rely on that,
And it's a problem
model.
for us and for you, because with droughts and things like that, then if that's mostly what you rely on to source your ingredients, what happens when you have more and more dysfunction over there?
Yeah.
Where you source your ingredients.
And when you do have that like when it is centralized like that, so any of the it can, what happens in California affects us in Cleveland. For example, if the strawberry, if it was wet or something, the whole crop is gone, and then strawberries get too expensive. And I think the biggest drive, and not to simplify it, but I think it has to deal with money. You know what I mean? That's why the industry is set up to do it like that, because you're trying to produce as much as you can to drive down the price. Because as customer, I mean, we're very sensitive to cost. You know what I mean? As far as going out to eat, or even going to the grocery store. So we can tell the difference if you see strawberries or lettuces that go up by $1 or $2, you might think twice about purchasing those ingredients. Or if you go to your restaurant, you're like, wow, why is some of these, like when I was at Lucky's, that was a premium brand. You know what I mean? Like, breakfast is going to cost you. You be prepared to pay. It's $10 to $15 per entree. Whereas, okay, if you go to like Denny's or one of these chain, or IHOP or something, so it's definitely it is a premium to use local. But I think with this pandemic, it's starting to show, especially with the meat. Good example is with the there's only like three or four meat packers in the country. There's those big factories that the farmers, they kind of co-op and send the cattle to these processing plants, and then from there it goes to different to all the different grocery stores and restaurants. And with this pandemic, it's really if there's an issue at one of the plants, there is a food shortage. You know what I mean? And it was really interesting to see that a lot of the local, and I'm on Facebook with a lot of local farmers, and how especially the meat farmers, like they saw an uptick in bump in business, because now suddenly it made sense to shop locally, because it's just not available. I can't go to even if I wanted to go to the grocery store, it's not.
And the reality is that it is more sustainable for more than one reason. When we say sustainable, it doesn't even mean environmentally only. Economically, it's more sustainable. We're talking about that in terms of stress right now. It is more sustainable for a lot of reasons. Yeah. Obviously, less transport, less distribution.
Yeah.
Which ideally, you would want your food to be as fresh as possible anyway. So there's a lot to it. Are you saying basically that money is a big part? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. That I think it boils down to the cost. I mean, to me, it's I have a small family. I cook a lot at home, and I'm very sensitive to those prices, and until if something and when you talk about the cost, it's not just the cost of it's also the way the sustainable the way that these business, when we talk about how they're farming, and because you have these monocultures and they do deplete the soil, so you have to use a lot of fertilizer to replenish the ground. And I don't know if you know this, but to make fertilizer is actually a byproduct of the you need a lot of fossil fuel to do it. You know what I mean? So now we're talking about this whole idea of oil comes into in a roundabout way. We're using oil, you know what I mean? So I mean, when you think about oil, you're thinking, well, it's just your car, or to get stuff going. But a lot of our food, why it's so cheap is because it gets subsidized from all that oil to make the fertilizer, and then from the fertilizer, that's how you're able to get these high yield.
Which creates other down the line issues, and you're talking about with the runoff and things like that. But then it's also talking about oil, where heavy industrialized agriculture means heavy machinery. You mentioned that earlier. Well, these heavy machinery is just yet another thing that is replacing human labor to a certain extent, and also, well, it needs oil, it needs fuel.
Yeah, to make the fertilizer, you need natural gas to make fertilizer. So.
So when you're teaching how to construct a dish, you're saying that obviously the cost, and that fluctuates, is a big part. So how much of that in the decision is left for for nutrition and that kind of like balance of ingredients and choice of ingredients beyond the monetary aspect.
So as a chef, we actually I mean, I hate to say this, but we're in the business of making customers happy. So, it's not so much not, I mean, how should I say this? It's our main focus is making food taste good. Like, okay, we're going to cook it a certain way or so. And what we find is when you use local produce and local meats and that product is a far superior product than if we were to buy it from, from a factory farm. So when I teach my students is, okay, let's try we got some butternut squash. This is from the farm, it's farm fresh. And when they try it versus, and then when they taste it, they're like, holy crap, this stuff tastes amazing. And why does it taste amazing? Because, well, first of all, it was, it didn't have to trout, so you have these big farms, they for example, like potatoes, you might not get it 6-8 months down the line, you know what I mean? Because it sits in a warehouse, but once you get it, and in that, what happens? So, for example, if you have squash, the fresher you eat it, the sugar doesn't turn to starch. So when you have a butternut squash or acorn squash that's local, that was from a farmer, it's a totally different product than if you were to go to Giant Eagle or Heinen's or whatever. Actually, Heinen's does carry a lot of local, which is I like that for them. But they so there is a different experience. So that's what we're teaching the students is, you use as you're choosing your products, like one aspect of using local is it tastes better. Okay. But then also the students need to learn about food costs. Like if you're going to use this product, this local farmer, yes, you're going to pay a little bit more. So you have to reflect that in your menu, right? And the price. And it's really important that you market it to your customers. So when there is that sensitive price sensitivity, the customers know what they're buying. So for example, if I'm going to Lucky's Cafe, when we were there, the owner was very deliberate as far as saying we source from local farmers. Everything is handcrafted. You know what I mean? So, the dish that they're paying, there's a reason why it costs 2 times as much as Denny's. It's not, you're not comparing apples to apples. It's a different product, different experience.
And the sad reality of it is that basically we are talking about food that not only is more flavorful, but also more nutritionally.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And mm-hmm. Then we're talking about costs that are more expensive, or at least let's just flip that and just say that like the less nutritious food will be more affordable. Therefore, for a lot of people who are financially not well-to-do necessarily, and it doesn't mean you don't even have to be poor necessarily to start having difficulty to have access financially to mm-hmm. type of food like that. That kind of creates this chasm, this problematic of where you fall on the line financially decides how healthily you can eat sometimes, or so it feels.
And when we talk about, if we kind of take a step back and think, finance is one part of it. Like, yes, it's cheaper to go here, but also when you talk about, like, if we just talk about resources, time as well as a resource. So, if I'm going to McDonald's or, I'm paying $5 to get a burger, you're not only is it cheap to eat, but also it's that time. If I were to go to the grocery store and make a hamburger, I have to, you're building in my time now is to go shopping. I have to cook everything and I have to clean everything up. You know what I mean? So that's a huge chunk of that's a big resource. So if I'm working full time, if I have kids, you know what I mean? Like that resource is suddenly shrunk. So, it's not just the money. Yeah, money is part of it, but also I would add that, food is so cheap and it's so convenient to make up for that time, because there's not enough time to do that kind of thing.
I completely agree.